You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 5th of August 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Thomas Waterhouse. Coming up on today's programme. Troops, reservists and civilians are all put to the test as 10 days of huge military drills get underway in Taiwan. We'll look at how real the threat posed by neighbouring China actually is. We'll also get an update on the first ever earnings report from Elon Musk's SpaceX, and we'll examine the best ways to overhaul avenues and find shade in our cities. Then,
I never thought I could listen to some Japanese folk music in such a cool club in Greenpoint in New York City.
We'll end the show with a dip into the musical world of Tokyo-born but New York-based artist Miho Hattori. That's all right ahead here on The Briefing with me, Thomas Waterhouse. A very good afternoon to you all, wherever you're listening in from central London. Just how ready are the Taiwanese armed forces and the local population should China decide to invade or blockade the island? That's the key question authorities hope to answer over the next 10 days as the annual Hanquang drills get underway. They've been held each year since 1984, but one noteworthy change to this year's tests is the temporary but intentional slowing of internet speeds to see how civilians communicate when the connection is limited. These are Taiwan's largest drills, and they come as Beijing ramps up its military pressure and presence in the region almost daily. Taiwan's Defence Minister Wellington Koo summarised the goal of the exercise by simply saying training can always be better. Joining us now is William Yang, Senior Northeast Asia Analyst for the International Crisis Group. Good afternoon to you, William.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much for being here. Now, day one of these annual tests is now over where you are. Just what happened, and was everything a success?
Yeah, I think the drills and the exercise largely went smoothly. But like you mentioned, this is only the start of a 10-day intensive drill that involves many different aspects and also many different troops and also parts of the society and the country as a whole to actually pull this off together. I think in terms of the scale, this is yet another, the largest and also the most complicated in terms of the exercise components and also the scenarios that are going to be demonstrated and simulated throughout the 10-day period.
And if, William, we look at day one, just actually what took place, what kinds of exercises were carried out?
So the day one exercise is largely focusing on the regular, I think the tanks were on the road, and at the same time, there were also the defense of basic infrastructure being carried out. So these are largely the more traditional components that have been part of the Taiwan's Hanquang exercise for years. But I think importantly, the emphasis and the focus on protecting and simulating the protection of infrastructure projects like the power plants is definitely the focus of today's exercise so far.
Now, previous drills were criticised in the past for perhaps being PR stunts or for not being as complete or as effective as they could be. What was wrong with the tests that were carried out in previous years?
So the traditional Han Kuang exercises have put a lot of emphasis on demonstrating the capabilities or or showcasing how capable the Taiwanese military is. So a lot of these drills are being highly choreographed and also preset and pre-programmed. And a lot of the times they become way too much like a showcase and rather missing a lot of the components that would make them actually look real, especially when Taiwanese people are imagining what might happen on an actual battlefield. So that has been an area of improvement for the Taiwanese military over the last few years. And a lot of the emphasis now are being put on consecutive, nonstop military exercise for 24 hours, for example, because they want the Taiwanese military to become familiar with that type of scenario and the situation, which is closer to the actual wartime situation.
Now, William, this is all really about China, of course. How real is the threat posed currently by Beijing to Taiwan?
We have definitely seen an increase of China's so-called gray zone operations. These are maneuvers by its aircraft, by its naval vessels, and increasingly by its Coast Guard vessels in waters and airspaces around Taiwan almost on a daily basis. And since the 2024, we have seen these operations being pushed much closer to Taiwan's main island. And increasingly, the Chinese Coast Guard are intruding into waters that are considered as Taiwan's territorial waters. And just this past June, China conducted a more than a month consecutive Coast Guard operations in waters east of Taiwan. So this is a reflection of the level of the aggression that Taiwan is facing on a daily basis.
Now, authorities in Taiwan are clearly pulling out all the stops to send a message to Beijing that we are ready if and when you attack. But there's also a message that Taiwan is keen to send to Washington.
Right, because just like all the countries around the world, including the UK, the Trump administration has really been putting a lot of pressure on allies to showcase more willingness to shoulder the responsibilities to defend themselves. And in the case of Taiwan, it's important for Taiwan to convince Washington that it is doing more to actually enhance its overall defense capabilities. And so the involvement of Taiwan's civilians in these military exercises definitely serve as a component of that, because by familiarizing Taiwanese people with this type of situation and raising the overall awareness for getting prepared for a potential military attack from China, it will hopefully have a positive impact on raising the overall willingness to fight among the Taiwanese population, which is an important indicator for the U.S. government when they are assessing Taiwan's preparedness when it comes to defense.
And we should also just point out that in the corridors of power in Taipei, there are differences of opinion when it comes to how much money should actually be spent on defense.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's another area of the pressure that Washington has been putting on countries around the world, especially on Taiwan. We need to remember that at some point, the U.S. government actually proposed that Taiwan should probably raise its defense budget to 10% of its GDP, which would be unheard of for any country unless it's already in active conflict. So that debate has been ongoing within Taiwan. The government here has been trying to commit to a major increase, but at the same time, it is facing a lot of domestic pushback from the opposition parties that currently control the parliament. So while the Taiwanese government has declared that willingness and determination, but it is facing a lot of challenge when it comes to execution.
Thanks very much, William. That was William Yang, Senior Northeast Asia Analyst for the International Crisis Group, joining us there from Taipei. Now here's Tom Webb with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Thomas. Russian missile and drone strikes on Kyiv and the surrounding region killed 17 people and wounded 44 others overnight into Wednesday. Ukraine has carried out its own campaign against Russian retail logistics, striking multiple warehouses belonging to Wildberries, often described as Russia's answer to Amazon. More than 800,000 people displaced by war in Lebanon have begun returning to their hometowns, following a lull in violence amid the Israel-Hezbollah war. The announcement comes as Lebanon and Israel begin a new round of US-sponsored talks in Rome aimed at ending the fighting, which are scheduled to run until tomorrow. Cathay Pacific Airways has recorded its second highest earnings for a first half in history. The Hong Kong flag carrier has weathered the Iran war's impact on fuel costs, thanks to strong passenger numbers and cargo demand. Cathay's performance stands out among regional rivals. Singapore Airlines last week reported it swung into its first quarterly loss in more than 4 years as fuel costs before hedging benefits outstripped revenue growth. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Thomas.
Thanks very much, Tom. Let's get a roundup now of the business news with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts, one of our regular contributors who is standing by. Good afternoon, Ewan. How are you today?
Hi, Thomas. Very well, thank you.
Good, great to hear. There's one story that we really can't avoid this Wednesday. That's Elon Musk's SpaceX. It's reported its first earnings since its mega share flotation. How has that all been received by investors?
Yeah, it's less than 2 months since SpaceX took off as a public company in the biggest share offering in history. And fair to say it has been a bumpy ride for investors. Shares in the rocket, satellite and AI company thrust higher, gaining more than 30% in the first days of trading. But since then, it has been a steady return towards the ground. And investors giving a clear thumbs down today to the company's first set of results. Company earnings are generally judged against the estimates of analysts, and on that metric, or rather metrics, this was a pretty solid set of numbers. Revenue came in at $7.8 billion. That was well ahead of the estimates for $6.8 billion. And losses for the quarter, SpaceX is a long way from making any money. Well, they were less than expected as well. But it is our old friend artificial intelligence investment which is concerning investors. This is exactly the same numbers which has seen other big tech companies' shares punished. And SpaceX spent close to $16 billion on AI investment during the quarter. That is more than twice as much as its total revenue. And so far in the New York pre-market, SpaceX shares currently down more than 11% today, now trading well below their price in that June share offering.
Now, you and I both live here in London. We're probably used to, taking a black cab or an Uber, but there's a new development, and that's that robo-taxis are coming to the streets of London.
Yeah, they certainly are. If you've been out and about in London, you won't have failed to notice there are the conspicuous-looking autonomous cars out and about being put through their paces. Well, we now have a launch in sight with the awarding today of a licence for Uber and London-based startup Wave to start carrying passengers in robo-taxis. The companies say that the riders who've signed up for the trial will be able to try the service starting this summer ahead of a full rollout. It should be said that every car will have a supervisor on board with their hands off the wheel unless an intervention is required. A job which requires doing absolutely nothing whilst also concentrating. I won't be applying for any of these roles. I think the interesting business story behind this is the rivalry between Wave and Waymo, which is owned by Google parent company Alphabet. Waymo is planning to start offering trips without a human behind the wheel, starting as soon as this year. And those will be offered on Waymo's own app, therefore bypassing Uber and the other ride-hailing companies. So that's something which perhaps will be causing a little bit of concern at Uber HQ.
And Ewan, just how do you feel about getting on board or climbing into a robo-taxi?
Well, I'm quite excited, if I'm honest. I think probably at first you'd want to have the supervisor, as they call it there, the qualified taxi driver sitting there. I think probably getting into a car with no driver whatsoever will feel very odd. But I mean, there's no doubt that is coming. And I think we'll probably all be pretty used to it in a few years' time, but it's certainly going to feel very, very strange at first.
It absolutely will, yes. Ewan Potts, our regular Bloomberg contributor, thank you very much. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now, our new summer newspaper, printed in Switzerland but distributed globally, is now available on newsstands. If you've already purchased and flicked your way through your copy of Med, Mountains and More, you'll know that there's a rich mix of high-altitude or shoreline stories written as the perfect accompaniment to your summer break. Contributing to our first issue of this new format is Julia Webster Ayuso, a British-Spanish journalist and regular Monocle contributor, and she joins us now from our Paris studio. Good afternoon to you, Julia.
Hello.
Julia, you're not near a mountain, nor are you anywhere near the Mediterranean. What is life in Paris looking like this Wednesday lunchtime?
Well, the heat waves have kind of, it's been extremely hot recently again. I mean, it hasn't really stopped this summer. Today, it's a little bit windier. The temperature's gone down a little bit, so I think everyone is enjoying a slightly cooler day today.
Lovely. Now, for this new paper, you've been looking at one of Europe's most popular tourist cities. That's, of course, Barcelona. And one particular road that leads all the way from the city centre to the sea. What is being changed on this road and why?
Yeah, so Barcelona's my hometown, actually. So I enjoyed walking down La Rambla, which is a place I know well. And it's one of the big urbanism projects going on in Barcelona at the moment, and it's being built as a way to recover it as Barcelona's central hub, because this is a street that has been kind of tailored to tourists a lot in recent years, and locals now have been avoiding it for years because it's mostly tourist souvenir shops and restaurants selling paella and those kinds of things. So now this redevelopment project aims to return it to locals, and the things that are changing are mostly to do with how the space is being distributed. So there's going to be less terrace space. There's going to be new design rules when it comes to how you display menus and how you design those terraces where people kind of go and have their sort of first meal in Barcelona. And the famous market on this street called La Boqueria is also changing. Over the years, it has sold a lot of takeaway food and drinks, and now the merchants have agreed to dedicate at least 50% of it to fresh produce to bring locals back.
Now, in a separate article, you've also looked at the increasingly important role of trees in the places that we live in. And you spoke with the Belgian landscape architect Bas Schmetz. His team are designing a new garden, in fact, around Notre Dame, where you are in Paris. Let's just have a quick listen to what he's been saying.
So why do we plant trees in cities? Well, cities were mostly cut out of the forest, and if we only put buildings and hardscape, we create heat islands, we create deserts, and you cannot live in a desert. So the tree creates the atmosphere. I mean, the trees did build the atmosphere in which we live. The air that we breathe is made by plants. So we need those trees to produce an environment, an atmosphere in which we can live. Trees also help to regulate humidity, to capture the rainwater in the leaves, and the whole way they work. And so trees are an essential part of keeping the environment an habitable area. Of course, you can plant many small trees. You can plant one big tree. That's all depending on the amount of soil you have, the amount of finances you have. I mean, we have planted trees that are 14 meters high at plantation. We've also planted saplings. So depending on the project, the context, there's different ways of doing this. Do you have time? Don't you have time? But I think we have to rethink our cities drastically from that point of view. How can we understand the city as a possibility for nature, really? Instead of just saying we needed more trees, the whole city should be rethought as a metabolism, as a way to introduce nature into our artificial environments.
That was Bas Schmetz, the landscape architect there. Now, Julia, as you were saying, it's certainly been hot in many parts of Europe this summer already, with record-breaking heat in many parts. And this thirst for shade is really huge, isn't it?
Yes, so with Europe experiencing such brutal heat waves, trees are becoming important business, and nurseries across Europe are seeing increased demand. The global tree services market is expected to reach 2.5 billion in 2030. So we're really seeing an increased focus on urban greening and rising investment in green infrastructure in cities. And tree canopy is really crucial to cooling cities. And studies now recommend a minimum 30% tree coverage in urban areas. So this means a lot of the time planting larger trees might be a good option because that's a faster way to provide shade. But as Bas Schmetz was pointing out, saplings are also important in cities where there's limited space and limited soil for the roots to grow. So it's really something that needs to be considered depending on what kind of space we're talking about. I went to a tree nursery in Spain near the Spanish city of Alicante that mostly supplies Mediterranean trees around the world, so like olive trees, palm trees, fig trees, and they're seeing increased demand around the world. I also spoke to another nursery in Catalonia that supplies conifers across Europe, and they say that they can barely keep up with demand because there are so many public projects now that require lots of trees of different kinds, different sizes, and it's clear now that when urban planners are designing a space in a city, green space is absolutely necessary.
And Julia, just as you were writing these two articles for our new summer newspaper, Med Mountains and More, I was just wondering what you had personally learnt about the future of cities and how we should design cities.
Well, I think Paris is actually a very good example of a city that, being in Europe, the fastest warming continent, and experiencing these incredibly brutal heat waves where, we've had so many excess deaths in France due to these horrific temperatures. And Paris, over the past few years, has really adapted in a way that I think is exemplary, and a lot of cities will be looking to Paris as an example of a city that is increasing green space, increasing access to swimming areas in the Seine, places where people can cool down easily in the summer. And as I've learned with this article on the tree business, it's clear now that we cannot design new urban spaces without taking into account shade and trees.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia. That was Julia Webster Ayuso in our Paris studio. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. We end today's show in musical fashion. For our weekly look at the Japanese music scene, Nick Luscombe from Monocle Radio's Tokyo Music Hour has spoken with Miho Hattori, a Tokyo-born, New York-based singer, songwriter and artist. Best known as the co-founder of Sibo Matto and the original singing voice of Noodle in Gorillaz, she's also collaborated with artists including the Beastie Boys and John Zorn. Here, she discusses her music and life between Japan and New York.
I'm on a concrete way. The wind is blowing.
You've obviously worked a lot between Japan and the States. I wondered how you felt in terms of your sort of Japanese heritage, your kind of background. Do you kind of feel that you're Japanese, or do you feel that you're very international as an artist?
I've been here almost too long. Actually, my Japan time is shorter than my New York time already. I would say, but still I grew up in Japan. I still have a big and strong connection with my country and heritage, etc. So I consider I'm a between. That is actually connecting to my last solo album. I put the word between in the title of the album. I think that's describing a lot.
You come back to Japan, don't you? And you kind of visit and you perform in Japan still. Are there any big differences that you've really noticed in terms of culture in Japan? Are there things that really stand out to you now as being unusual?
Many people are talking about kind of lost 30 years in Japan, a lot with especially term of economy. When I'm hearing a lot of those, it's very interesting to see my own country because I experienced, and I think my generation was the last generation to feel Japanese economy bubble. Actually, I was still a kid, but I could feel and I remember that air and culturally as well. I felt actually blessed because of the situation. I could see so many different kind of film and music. There's a lot of like huge, interesting clubs, for example, and all artists from all over the world came to Tokyo back in time. So that was actually very special memory I have. But same time, I was thinking about we are losing something, especially the more traditional, the way of life, the way of thoughts with the development. I'm seeing, I would say my hometown, we used to have some sort of like a rice field. Even it's very close to center of the Tokyo, but now it's all gone. It's concrete. I was totally witnessing that development. But at the same time, I left Japan. Because I left Japan, I have so much, I would say, cravings for Japanese, something about Japan. So I personally feel like I'm more a keeper of Japanese culture in a way, which is so interesting to think about it.
Outside of Japan, Japanese culture is very strong now in terms of city pop music, for example, Japanese ambient music, but also these concepts like ma, for example, is regularly discussed by non-Japanese people, and obviously the matcha boom. So even though you're saying that the traditions may be declining in Japan, the awareness of Japan is much higher than it's ever been, I think, right, around the world.
Yeah, I never thought I could listen to some Japanese folk music in such a cool club in Greenpoint in New York City, which is a hip space and very community-oriented, cool place. And, I'm hearing those like the music or like countryside folk music. I was like, whoa, it's tripping. I never thought about it when I left Japan. But that's a fascinating thing about information, and that it's a fruit from those technology.
As a solo artist, I'm always amazed how I never know what to expect next, because it always feels like, even though there's a common thread through all of your work, it's always kind of different. It feels you always seem to be exploring, and I wonder what generates that kind of hunger for you in terms of just pushing and creating?
I think I'm very into conceptual things. And so I'm always thinking about that, I think. And with the time and space, I guess I happen to have some idea. And when I find it, I'm very nerdy about it. So I do a lot of research, and I do enjoy the work a lot. So those kind of things is I really love to develop and construct my concept.
We were listening there to Nick Luscombe speaking with Miho Hattori, and that full interview will be available on Tokyo Music Hour tomorrow at 5 a.m. London time or 1300 Tokyo time here on Monocle Radio. And that's all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Chris Chermak, our researcher was Kaylee Martin, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the very same time. I'm Thomas Waterhouse. Thanks for listening, and a very warm goodbye from everyone here at Midori House in London.